My boyfriend, Edward, and I had been together for 3 years, living a life that was poor but happy. When the doctor told me my illness had progressed too far to be treated, I made the tough call to stop treatment. I didn't want Edward to be burdened by my cancer, I just wanted to spend my last days with him. But the day I came back from the hospital, I saw him at a luxury store, dropping a fortune on another guy. Only when I decided to leave did he tearfully confess that he had been pretending to be poor just to test if my love was real. I gave a bitter laugh. Some people are born rich and don't have to hide their wealth, but because I was poor and ordinary, he had to test my sincerity. To put it bluntly, he thought I wasn't worthy, so he put me through a series of tests. The doctor told me I had late-stage stomach cancer. Because I'd put off treatment for so long, it was now incurable. I only had 6 months left to live. To be honest, when I first found out I was sick, I debated whether to get treatment. But after thinking about what my boyfriend, Edward, and I earned, I decided to give up. I didn't want to be a burden on him or drag our little family down. I just wanted to be with him for the little time I had left. After we came out, both of our families cut us off. Without any help from our parents, Edward and I were barely scraping by on our salaries of $3,000 or $4,000 a month in this expensive city. It was tough, but we were content. We scrimped and saved, just wanting to build a better future for each other. Thinking about this brought a small smile to my face. The hospital was a couple of miles from home. To save the bus fare, I decided to walk back. As I passed through the main shopping district, I saw a figure who looked a lot like my boyfriend, Edward, except this person was wearing a custom-tailored suit and radiated an air of wealth. When I followed him into a high-end luxury boutique, I confirmed it. It was my Edward. He was on one knee, putting a shoe on a handsome young man. The man playfully ruffled Edward's hair, pouting his lips like a spoiled child. Then, Edward told the staff to wrap up all the new items from the latest season. The clerk quoted a price of over $10,000. I stared at Edward, taking in every detail, the mole behind his ear, his features, his height. Everything told me that this was my boyfriend. Suddenly, a sharp pain twisted in my stomach, and my nose began to tingle. An indescribable feeling washed over me. I felt pathetic and ridiculous, pitiful and comical all at once. What could I even do? Rush up and ask him why he was pretending to be poor? Why he could spend tens of thousands of dollars to make someone else happy while I was pinching every penny for him, even letting my cancer go untreated. A wave of shame and inferiority washed over me. If I said anything, it would just sound like I was after his money. I said nothing. I turned around, spent $2 and took the bus home. Today was my birthday, and my big treat to myself was buying a pound of shrimp. After finding out the truth, the only thing I could bring myself to do was pathetically spend $2 on a bus ride home. The tears finally started to fall. But even as my emotions needed an outlet, my first thought was that I couldn't stop what I was doing. I had to hurry up and prepare these shrimp before they went bad. Otherwise, it would be a waste. The difference between people can be night and day. Edward and I were never in the same league. Suddenly, a warm embrace wrapped around me from behind. Edward rested his head on my shoulder. "What's wrong, babe?" I quickly wiped my tears. "Nothing. I just splashed something in my eye when I was prepping the food." Edward pulled a gift box out from behind his back. "Happy birthday, baby." Inside was a bottle of cologne. I knew it was the free gift the store was giving away with purchases, the same store where he'd just spent all that money on the other guy. I forced a smile. "I told you, you don't need to buy useless things like this. We could have made 2 meals with this money." Edward seemed a little disappointed. Realizing what I had just said, I knew better than to say anything else. I was always like this, thinking the romantic surprises Edward planned were a waste of money. I always said something to ruin the mood. I didn't have a good family life and got used to being poor from a young age. So even after I moved out and could afford to eat, I still carried those childhood habits with me. You can't change the way your environment shapes you. For me, our love was something I would protect with everything I had. But for him, it was just a game, a rich kid having a little fun with a commoner like me. He's probably laughed about my cheap, pathetic ways behind my back countless times. Suddenly, I felt so tired of it all. I didn't want to play his game anymore. We should break up. After that, we entered a cold war. The atmosphere at home became incredibly tense. The once warm little apartment now felt like an ice-cold prison. Thinking back, it seemed like every time Edward and I fought, he never tried to make up with me. Sometimes he didn't even realize I was mad. I'd have to get over it myself and then go running back to him. Other times, he knew I was angry but wouldn't do anything about it. I tried to stand my ground, telling myself I wouldn't be the first to give in this time. But I could never stop myself from wanting to share things with him, from missing him. Just seeing him would make my resolve soften. So I was always the one who caved first. But not this time. I silently promised myself. I stopped initiating conversations with Edward. I always avoided his gaze. We lived under the same roof but felt miles apart. Every day after work, I'd hurry into my room to avoid him. He would often sit alone in the living room, smoking, his face looking especially haggard in the haze. Sometimes I couldn't help but think that maybe Edward was only with me because I was easy to handle and didn't cause trouble. He was tired of fancy food and just wanted a simple meal for a change. But now that I was giving him the cold shoulder, how much longer could a rich kid like him be patient? I tortured myself with the thought that he was probably reaching his breaking point, and soon we'd be completely over. The days passed with no sign of things getting better between us. My heart grew colder, wondering how much longer this could last. One night, Edward knocked on my bedroom door. My heart skipped a beat. The day had finally come. "I know you're not asleep. Can we please talk?" His voice was low and hoarse. I didn't answer, just wrapped the blanket tighter around myself as tears soaked my pillow. Edward stood outside the door for a long time. So long that I don't even know when I drifted off to sleep, but he came in at some point. He held me from behind, just like countless nights before, and gently kissed my neck. I felt a cold drop of liquid on my neck. I realized it was Edward's tear. His tear was like a trigger, and my own tears started to flood out. I have to admit, I'm a coward. I had poured all the love and energy of my life into Edward. I didn't have the courage to leave him, it was just too painful. Maybe this is just how it has to be, I thought. No matter what, I couldn't find the courage to leave Edward. The pain was so intense it felt like my heart couldn't breathe, like I'd lost the will to live. Even if it was like drinking poison to quench my thirst, maybe it would make the rest of my short, bleak life a little less unbearable. After that night, we made up, but I knew that once some things change, they can never go back. I tried my best to ignore the rift between Edward and me, waiting for him to come home from work like I used to. No, I should say, waiting for him to finish his high society life, change back into his old clothes and shoes, and rejoin the game he was playing with me. I still made dinner for Edward as usual, forcing a smile onto my face. Edward had also noticed the strange distance between us since my birthday. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "Oliver, how long are you going to keep this up? You wanted to break up on your birthday, and ever since you've been walking around with that sourpuss face, being all awkward with me. Is it because I didn't buy you that lipstick from your phone's photo album?" My face went pale. After seeing them at the mall that day, I had been searching online for the prices of those shoes. I knew nothing about big brands, I just wanted to see how much Edward had spent on that guy, constantly comparing myself to him. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, like a recluse who had forgotten how to speak after a long silence. I opened my mouth, but in the end, nothing came out. I placed the soup on the table and continued to serve the food. He seemed to get fed up, slamming the door on his way out. Later, I called him many times, but he never picked up. Before, if Edward didn't answer my first call, I wouldn't call a second time, afraid of bothering him or making him annoyed. But now, I was like a desperate ex waiting for a call from a husband who's moved on. I dialed his number over and over, waiting for him to finally lose his patience and tell me it was over. I was waiting for a death sentence, no longer wanting to be tortured by 1,000 cuts. I never got a call back from Edward, but I did get one from my stepbrother, Sam. My dad and stepmom had died in a car accident. Now, the only one left at home was Sam, who was still in high school. Sam was my stepmother's son, and we had no blood relation. I only felt resentment for him, not affection. His and his mother's arrival had shattered my life. I went back for the funeral. My dad left the house to Sam. I, his biological son, got nothing, yet I was expected to shoulder the debt from the car accident. I always thought that if I could just escape that house, I could escape the mess for good. It was Edward who gave me the courage to leave my toxic family. That's why, even though life was hard, I took out a loan to buy a house, wanting to build a home with him. Edward had told me not to be afraid, that he'd be there for me from now on, and I'd never have to face my family or my bad memories again. But reality slapped me in the face. Because I shared the same blood as that man, I could never truly escape this place. I felt like I was drowning, the voices of my relatives swallowing me whole. Suddenly, someone grabbed my hand. It was Sam. My relatives pushed him towards me, their faces plastered with smiles, telling me I had to take care of my little brother. These were the same relatives who had called me disgusting for being gay. Now, terrified that the responsibility of raising Sam would fall on them, they were all smiling and praising me for being responsible, pushing him onto me. I shoved Sam away. He's not my brother. I have nothing to do with this family. His dad left him the house, so he should be the one to pay off this debt. It has nothing to do with me. Even though I said that, I knew deep down that I had that man's blood in my veins. I couldn't escape. Hearing my words, a frantic-looking woman rushed out from the crowd and started hitting and screaming at me. From her words, I gathered she was a victim of the car accident. Her husband had been killed, and her child was in the hospital, waiting for compensation money to survive. I thought about making Sam sell the house to pay the debt, and if it wasn't enough, that would be his problem. But now I couldn't do that. This was a mother waiting for money to save her child's life. Sam tearfully pulled the woman away, shielding me. Pushed him again. Don't pretend to be nice. I'm not going to raise you. But the boy didn't back down or feel ashamed by my attitude. He was full of guilt. I'm sorry, bro. I didn't know Dad would leave the house to me. Don't blame him. Mom and Dad were in the accident because they were driving to see you for your birthday. Dad really cared about you. In that instant, I felt like I had been plunged into an icy abyss. I didn't understand. They had used the cruelest words in the world to make me leave this family in disappointment. And now they were stabbing me with these emotional knives, making it impossible for me to shirk the debt with a clear conscience. I even started to hate Edward a little. If he hadn't lured me into loving him, if he hadn't given me the courage to leave with his empty promises, I wouldn't have broken ties with my family. The house might have been partially mine. My dad wouldn't have gotten into an accident on his way to see me, and an innocent family wouldn't have been dragged into this. But I was also keenly aware that I couldn't blame anyone. I was lured in by Edward because I had pinned all my hopes for love on him. So I deserved to be deceived and left to struggle. My dad probably did love me, but his awkwardness and pride brought me unspeakable pain. He left the house to Sam because Sam wasn't his blood relative, hoping to protect the house from being seized for the debt. But I still couldn't forgive my dad for the pain he caused me. After that day, I don't know how I numbly arranged everything and saw off the guests. I didn't bother with Sam again. I have to admit, I still couldn't get over my jealousy of him. I left my hometown and returned to the city. I quit my stable, respectable, but low-paying job. I started working multiple jobs a day. A waiter at a karaoke bar, moving boxes, delivering food. I survived on 3 steamed buns and a bottle of water a day. In the final days of my life, I no longer had the energy to deal with Edward. I just wanted to earn money to pay off the life I was now responsible for. All a person wants in this world is a clear conscience. One day, while I was serving drinks as a waiter at the karaoke bar, I saw Edward in a private room. The rich kids around him were pressuring another guy to drink, and Edward was protectively taking the drinks for him. As the waiter, I pushed the door open to deliver their order. The room was dim, but Edward and I recognized each other the moment our eyes met. It had been a month since I'd last seen him. He seemed a bit flustered and nervous. I lowered my gaze, pretended not to know him, and quietly left the room. The moment the door closed, a clear line was drawn between us. But fate had other plans. The creditor called, crying that her child couldn't wait any longer and needed surgery, which would cost $10,000. Filled with guilt, I promised to get the money for the surgery as soon as possible. I stood by the window, watching the traffic flow by, and suddenly realized I had no one to talk to. Hesitantly, I dialed Edward's number. This time, he finally answered. He didn't say anything. After a long pause, I asked to borrow $10,000 from him. Edward scoffed. "Oliver, is that all you have to say to me? You might as well go beg on the street." He hung up, and the dial tone echoed endlessly in my ear. At this point, I really wasn't much different from a beggar. After I found out his secret, he never gave me a single explanation. It seemed like every time I asked him for something involving money, he became extremely sensitive. Why could he drop a fortune to make that other guy happy but be so stingy with me, as if he were guarding against some gold-digging rat? Because I was born poor, I must be inherently inferior, so he had to be on guard against me at all times. Not long after, the manager found me and fired me. He didn't give me my final paycheck. Instead, he mocked me for not knowing my place, saying that a VIP like Edward was out of my league and that I should get rid of my foolish ideas. I grabbed the manager, demanding my wages, but he just had some guys beat me up. In that moment, I clearly understood the gap between Edward and me. He was high and mighty, and I was like an ant. He could decide my fate with just a single word. In the alley behind the karaoke bar, I was beaten until my whole body ached. I curled up, my consciousness fading. I saw Edward at the end of the dark alley, under the streetlight, carefully helping the other guy into a car. This was the first time I looked at Edward's face without a trace of heartache or softness. All I wanted to do was slap him a few times, to return all the injustice I had suffered. I hated him. Why did he get to play with my feelings just because he was rich? Why did his arrogance, his assumption that I was chasing after him, cost me the job I had worked so hard to get? Lying in that alley, listening to Edward's gentle words to the boy in his arms, my heart turned completely cold. I felt like I was in a cold, deep abyss. The surrounding darkness and cold made it impossible to breathe. I remembered the wonderful times we had spent together, those poor but happy days, now just distant memories. On this quiet night, I lay on the ground like a dead dog, my tears dried up, with only endless pain and despair left in my heart. I knew we had reached the end. After Edward left, I forced myself to get up from the ground. I sold the house we owned together and scraped together the money for the surgery. Edward and I had each paid half of the down payment on this house. After Edward said he was laid off from his unstable job, I was the one who covered the mortgage and all our living expenses. Looking back, he was probably just guarding his money and didn't want to spend it on me. Anyway, Edward was a rich kid from a wealthy family. The gifts he bought to woo his lovers were worth more than this house. He probably wouldn't even care about this little bit of money. It's laughable that I played house with him for so many years, only to end up with a terminal illness. If he really wanted to make a fuss about it, I'd just pay him back for his half of the down payment later. It took time to sell the house and get the cash. In the end, the child couldn't be saved. The child's mother attacked me like a madwoman and ended up in a holding cell for causing a disturbance at the hospital. The police told me to have a family member or friend bail me out. I looked through my phone's contact list and realized there wasn't a single person I could call to get me out. Suddenly, Edward called. My heart jolted as if it had been shocked awake. But he was just calling to confront me about selling the house. I bit my lip hard, saying nothing. He didn't speak either. It wasn't until my mouth filled with the taste of blood that I mumbled, "I sold the house. I needed the money." He hung up before I could finish. I wanted to say that I would pay him back when I had the money. I wanted to tell him what I'd been through, to seek comfort in his arms. But he didn't listen to any of it. He just hung up. Even after being abandoned by him 1,000, 10,000 times, in my darkest moments, I still longed for his embrace. I'm so pathetic. I thought to myself. The small cell was filled with a pungent, musty smell. Water droplets seeped through the walls, and the floor was damp. I huddled in a corner, my body shaking uncontrollably. My illness worsened in this harsh environment. The pain in my stomach was like a knife twisting inside me, almost unbearable. Every breath became difficult, as if an invisible hand was tightly gripping my throat. I tried to find something to ease the pain, but there was nothing around me but cold, damp walls. Loneliness and despair were my only companions. I just stared into the darkness. In the end, it was Sam who came to get me out. I don't know how a high school student managed to skip school and come all this way. He had never been out of our small town. How did a kid like him find me in this huge, unfamiliar city? I had never paid any attention to Sam growing up. I lay on his back as he carried me. In a daze, I realized this boy had grown so tall. Sam took me to the hospital where he learned about my condition. The young man, now grown, stood up straight. Ashamed and powerless because he had no money, he clenched his fists tightly. I was the one who spoke first, telling the doctor I had already stopped treatment. Sam and I went back to our hometown. He applied for day school so he could run home to cook for me during his lunch break and in the evening. I lay in bed, pain now a constant companion, my body growing weaker and more lethargic. Watching his busy figure, I had a morbidly amusing thought. Sam and I were like one of those stories you see in the news about a son carrying his mother on his back to college. I never imagined that in the final moments of my life, the person by my side would be Sam, this brother with whom I shared no blood and whom I had always hated. When Sam said he wanted to drop out of school to work and pay for my treatment, I slapped him across the face. Sam, stop with this sickening act. You just want the neighbors to praise you for your kindness after I die. Stop being so self-righteous. You and your mom stole my home. I wish I could kill you. The young man froze. I saw his eyes turning red. After Sam left, I looked at my own trembling hand. I was already a dying man. Why should I drag him down with me? Sam seemed to take my hateful words to heart. He tried to stay out of my sight and never spoke to me again, but he continued to take care of me as usual. Edward got engaged. I saw it on the news. Edward, the heir to the Y Corporation, was engaged to the artistic genius Julian. The headlines praised it as a love that transcended orientation and social norms. I thought Edward must really love that boy to be able to convince his family and announce their engagement so publicly. Of course, the affairs of such a power couple had nothing to do with an ordinary person like me. I didn't think about it anymore. I had a more pressing problem at hand. Sam got into a fight at school. He pushed another kid down the stairs, and the kid broke his leg. Sam fought him because the boy had insulted him, calling him the son of a murderer and the brother of a queer. A huge wave of helplessness washed over me. I had become this much of a burden. Sam was still young. He had a long life and a bright future ahead of him. He couldn't get expelled because of this. I never expected Edward to come looking for me. I never thought I would see Edward again in this lifetime. This was the first time I saw the real Edward clearly, in the light of day. He wore a custom designer suit, exuding a cold, reserved air. He seemed thinner, which made him look even more aloof. Edward offered me a deal. If I became his lover, he would take care of my brother's situation. I was a bit surprised. He was supposed to be in love with Julian, so why would he want to keep a lover on the side? Perhaps he was tired of gourmet meals and wanted to try simple fare like me again. After all, being with me was always hassle-free for him. It was as if I was meeting Edward for the first time, realizing what kind of person he truly was. I couldn't afford to think about dignity anymore. Trading my broken body for Sam's future was a good deal. I forced a pleading, ingratiating smile and agreed to Edward's demand. Before I could even speak, a sharp pain seized my abdomen, and my mouth filled with the taste of blood. The pain blurred my consciousness, my senses dulled. The last thing I saw before I fainted was Edward rushing towards me in a panic. He said something, but I couldn't hear him anymore. In that moment, he looked like the Edward who I first fell in love with. Edward found out about my illness. He started taking me to chemotherapy. I know I'm hideous now, skin and bones, all my hair gone. But he could still look at me with such affection. He would often sit by my hospital bed, looking at me without saying a word. I was wrong. I'm the one who destroyed our happiness. At night, Edward would hold me carefully, murmuring to himself, his voice filled with despair and regret. I lay in his arms, unable to sleep, Memories flooded my mind, every little moment we had spent together replaying in his head. He recounted our past over and over, remembering how I always refused to eat or dress well to save money, how I endured my pain when I was sick just so he wouldn't worry. He remembered all our sweet moments. He repeated these stories endlessly, as if trying to remind himself, and as if trying to pull me back to the past. However, it was all too late. Edward became quiet and withdrawn, no longer talking to anyone. He was drowning in his own pain and regret, unable to escape. But I just felt disgusted. It was as if fate was constantly reminding me of the mistakes I made when I was young. Perhaps knowing that Edward's guilt would allow me to do whatever I wanted, I decided I didn't want to see him anymore in my final days. I asked Edward to take me out for a walk. At every place we passed, I told him what I had endured there. I told him I knew the cologne he gave me for my birthday was a free sample from the counter where he'd bought things for Julian, and that on the same day the doctor had given me my late-stage cancer diagnosis. I told him how, when I ran into him at the karaoke bar, he was holding Julian as he got into a car, just a few feet away from where I was being beaten to a pulp by the manager's men. I told him how I asked him for money and he told me to go beg, and how I had to sell our home. I told him that when I was in a holding cell, the one person who could have gotten me out just confronted me and then hung up the phone. I knew these truths were more than Edward could bear. Seeing him in pain brought me a wave of satisfaction. He held me in his arms. "I'm sorry, Oliver. I'm so sorry. I'm begging you, please stop. We can start over. Everything will be okay." I didn't resist, just said faintly, "Edward, it's useless. Stop lying to yourself. We can't be okay. Even now, we've never had a conversation as equals. You can't face the things you did to me. You just want to forget and hide them, then deceive yourself into starting over. But you never once asked me what I wanted. Julian was born with a silver spoon, so when he asks you for gifts worth tens of thousands, you think it's the affection he deserves. But the moment I mention money, you instinctively think I'm a person of low character and put your guard up against me. Edward, I've already played the rich boy and the poor kid game with you. I don't want to play the pretending to be deeply in love sequel. The truth is, you know we don't have a future. I'll only ever be your lover, hidden away from the light." I was getting drowsy. I don't know how much I said to Edward, until I had no strength left. "Edward, in my final days, just let me be free." Epilogue. Edward wanted to marry Oliver, but he knew his parents would never agree to him being with Oliver, especially since he was a man. But Edward still wanted to be with Oliver. He had a huge fight with his parents. They promised that if Oliver could live without spending Edward's money and didn't covet their family's wealth, they would agree to them being together. So they devised this 3-year-long game. Oliver's performance made Edward very happy. It made him feel like he hadn't misjudged him. But his parents were losing their patience. After learning about Edward's sexual orientation, they changed their strategy. He could be with a man, but it had to be someone from a matching family background. So they found Julian for Edward to date. Edward didn't resist. He knew he and Oliver couldn't be together openly. He made a deal with Julian that Julian wouldn't interfere with him and Oliver. On Oliver's birthday, while buying things for Julian, he thought about how happy Oliver would be if he could bring him here to shop. Oliver was his lover. He deserved to enjoy these things, not haggle over a few cents at the vegetable market. Soon, the 3rd year would be up. Even if Oliver's status was a bit lacking, it wouldn't matter. At least he could introduce him to his parents, and they would approve of his character. He had already endured so much hardship he wasn't in a rush. On Oliver's birthday, he had actually prepared a 20,000 watch. But when it came time to give the gift, Edward still gave him the free cologne. He could feel that Oliver didn't like the gift. He frowned, thinking that if Oliver truly loved him, it shouldn't matter what the gift was. But Oliver actually wanted to break up over this. Edward felt he needed to re-evaluate him. The 3 years were almost over. Why couldn't he just endure a little longer? He had stuck it out with him through these hard times for so long. Once the 3 years were up, as his lover, Edward could give Oliver anything he wanted. So why was he being so difficult? Edward was upset. He had played this poverty game with Oliver for so long precisely because he wanted to introduce him to his parents. Although they couldn't have a public wedding, at least his parents would accept him, and he wouldn't lack for anything. Edward left their home. He was torn between his parents and Oliver, squeezing onto the subway every day, wearing cheap clothes to blend into Oliver's life, while also rushing to handle his family's business affairs. He was physically and mentally exhausted. He had thought about giving up, but he couldn't bear it. Finally, he decided to give Oliver one more chance. But when he went back, he could clearly feel that Oliver had changed. He acted the same as before, but Edward found the calluses on his hands, the way he haggled over grocery money, and his forced smiles to be particularly grating. When he saw the photos in Oliver's phone, he was certain that Oliver was doing it just to spite him. He had probably figured out his true identity and was now dropping hints to get benefits and make him spend money. Edward just felt incredibly annoyed and angry. He started giving Oliver the silent treatment. When he received call after call from Oliver, he just thought, I knew it. Oliver was no different from all the others. He was even frustrated that Oliver hadn't lived up to his expectations. Even if Oliver was faking it, he had been faking it for so long. Why couldn't he just keep it up a little longer? He tried to force himself to forget Oliver, starting to go on frequent dates with Julian to distract himself. That day, he saw Oliver at the karaoke bar. He was thinner, almost shockingly so. Edward felt a pang of pity, but then he thought that Oliver was probably doing this on purpose as an act for him, and he became angry again. He was torn between being angry at his malicious intentions and feeling like he'd been a fool, and feeling sorry for him for not taking care of himself. Oliver called him. Unsurprisingly, it was to borrow money. Edward laughed at himself. What was he even hoping for? After finding out that Oliver had sold the house, Edward, who had repeatedly told himself not to care about Oliver anymore, couldn't help but get angry. What did their 3 years together mean to Oliver? Seeing that he couldn't get any more benefits from him, he decided to sell the house to squeeze out the last bit of value. Edward felt betrayed. He had been played by Oliver. He called Oliver and got the confirmation he dreaded. Edward got engaged to Julian. He still chose to follow his plan and keep Oliver by his side. He couldn't stand the pain of being without Oliver. Even though he knew Oliver was a person of low character, that he had played him, Edward still couldn't leave him. He gave in. He offered to keep Oliver. Oliver agreed without any hesitation. He felt that Oliver was a complete stranger now. But what did it matter? He couldn't leave Oliver anyway. He was stuck on him for life. By the time Edward learned the whole truth, it was too late. He couldn't stop any of it. He couldn't stop Oliver's life from fading away. Couldn't stop Oliver from hating him. In the end, he sent Oliver back to Sam. He stayed by Oliver's side secretly, watching him walk towards death, leaving him forever. Author's note: Edward never saw Oliver as an equal. He looked down on him, so he tried to find a sparkle in his personality to prove to himself that Oliver was worthy of his love. When he believed Oliver's character was flawed, he couldn't accept it, choosing to escape and even feel resentment. Edward's so-called sacrifices and deep love were all self-defined. He didn't care about or pay attention to Oliver. He only focused on his own inner world, applying different labels to Oliver based on his own feelings. And Oliver, because of the trauma from his family upbringing, was trying to find someone to save him, to pull him out of the mud. That's why he saw Edward as his everything and gave too much, which made it so hard for him to leave. But in this world, the only person who can save you, the only one you can truly rely on, is yourself. Regarding the damage from one's family, parents may have their reasons or not know how to love, but the hurt is still hurt, can never be undone. You might come to accept it, but you can never truly let go or forgive because the pain is always there.